This is the navigator who crossed the ice walls and the story behind this map. Labeled as fiction, this story revolves around a gentleman named William Morris and his crew who fought for the Continental Navy in the Revolutionary War. It was a crew of 6 men on their vessel, but the only characters they talk about are Mr. Morris and a gentleman named Captain Butler, the captain of the ship throughout the war. Towards the end of the conflict, William Morris explains that one night, while on whiskey, the gentleman started telling naval stories. He had been disregarding the rest of the crew's stories until Captain Butler chimed in, and he talks about lands beyond the Arctic Circle. Throughout his military career as a naval captain, he had heard from the highest of high-ups that there was actually a passage through Antarctica to get to these lands, and that it's possible that these lands may even be inhabited by civilizations. Well, once he started talking about this, Mr. Morris was captivated, and he couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of the war. So he talks to the crew and the captain to see if they're on board, and after the war, he buys a naval sailing vessel. The crew decided that after the war, they were going to seek out these lands beyond the ice wall and find the passage that led to them. When they initially made the decision, they had no idea what they were in for. Before they left, something strange took place. It was November 12th, Captain Butler disappeared, and then a gentleman showed up and warned Mr. Morris not to take the trip. Morris was told that it wasn't in his best interest to take the trip because a certain organization didn't approve of it. So he met with the rest of the crew. Nobody knew where Captain Butler was, and they figured without his guidance, they shouldn't take the trip. Then November 14th, the day they were supposed to leave, rolls around, and Butler comes smashing through Morris's door with a bunch of maps and said, "Let's go." Butler explains he had to disappear because they knew he had the maps, and they knew he knew how to get to the outer lands. So Morris and Butler gather the rest of the crew, and they depart, leaving Charleston Harbor. Behind me, you'll see a map of what is said to be our land, Earth, or the known lands. They figured it'd take them around 6 months from the day they departed to get to the passages in Antarctica. In the late 1700s, shortly after the Revolutionary War, a Continental Army soldier bought a boat and was going to take a trip to Antarctica. This gentleman's name was William Morris, and he convinced some of his fellow soldiers that he fought alongside, along with Captain Butler, to man the ship and take the trip with him. See, these men were all part of the Continental Navy, so running an old sailing vessel wasn't nothing new to them. So after a few delays, around November 14th, they took off and they headed south. On the way there, they would only make one stop in South America to re-up on supplies for the trip. The waters were cold and frigid and a little rough along the way, but eventually they made it to the ice wall. According to the account, it was much more than just wanting to see Antarctica that brought them down there. Their real mission was to go beyond the wall and see the 33 alleged continents. As they sailed along the wall, they couldn't believe the actual size of it. It was much bigger than they ever imagined. The only one that didn't seem surprised is Captain Butler. It was almost as if he had been there before. It was now late spring, early summer, and some of the ice caps had already started to melt. They were sailing within a couple hundred yards of the wall when an odd current started taking their ship even closer to it. As they approached, the crew got more and more anxious. They began to wonder if they were going to collide with this massive structure. In some places, they claimed it was as tall as 200 meters. So as they sailed to the west along the wall, everybody was on pins and needles, except for Captain Butler. His confidence could not be shaken, and it actually calmed the crew to an extent. They continued on, and the current was pulling them ever closer to the wall, when suddenly they reached an opening in the structure. It was at that moment when the current picked up and pretty much took complete control of the boat. At that point, they were at the water's will. This current eventually ripped them into the channel, straightened them out, and sent them on their way. They made it. This alleged passage is known as the Summer Gates, and they only open in the summer when the ice melts. Back in those days, it was very odd for somebody to actually know about the Summer Gates. But because of Captain Butler stumbling upon some ancient maps, they were able to discover them. The crew was hooting and hollering in triumph as they passed through the channel and into the black waters beyond the ice wall.